What in the actual hell are they thinking? If you haven't heard by now, someone floated to Elon Musk and Doge the idea of handing out $5,000 checks to 78 million households as the agency cuts away wasteful government spending from Uncle Sam's bloated carcass. And reportedly, President Trump was receptive to the absolutely horrible idea. Not only would it fail in every economic capacity, it fails basic logic. Worst of all, it would be an utter betrayal to the mission behind Doge in the first place. Cutting wasteful spending and then redirecting directly to the public is not cutting wasteful spending. It's redirecting wasteful spending in another direction. And let's add some more dependency while we're at it. There is no good reason to do this. Zero. Trump supporters already love the guy and absolutely love what he's doing and actively encourage it. Trump's critics absolutely hate the guy, hate everything about him, and that's not going to change with a $5,000 check. I really hope this is a political stunt and that there's something else behind it, because this is exactly the shit everyone was hoping was going to be mercilessly terminated. As Milton Friedman pointed out in his Tyranny of the Status Quo in 1985, since the 1930s, the technique of buying votes with the voters' own money has been expanded to an extent undreamed of by earlier politicians. And what we're seeing now is unparalleled levels, and it's not good for a functioning economy or a republic. And let's be perfectly clear right up front. This is not giving people their money back, no matter how it might be made to sound. The government is still borrowing way over and above its means to finance the payment. Borrowing $500 billion from future generations is not giving people their money back. If government manages a major miracle, which happens to cut enough spending to run a surplus, then have this discussion, because only then would it be giving people money back that was taxed from the economy and giving it back to those who were taxed. Sending checks to everyone isn't that. It is rewarding people who paid zero taxes and created zero value, and it creates more dependency. It's another boondoggle redistribution. It is more central planning dressed up as justice. There's a lot to go through here, so let's start with basically the beginning. As was reported recently, this is from The Hill, the CEO behind President Trump's proposed $5,000 Doge dividend check said Wednesday that the initiative would deputize Americans to help root out government waste and fraud. So far, sounds great. James Fishback, chief executive of the investment firm Azoria, told News Nation's Chris Cuomo that the dividend program, quote, is totally reasonable. It would motivate citizens to report wasteful spending to the Department of Government Efficiency, or Doge, with larger potential payouts tied to greater savings found. Every American can step up, report fraud and abuse to Doge directly via X, and we'll see the savings go up, hit $2 trillion, and we'll see the checks dispersed next summer, Fishback said. And he claims this is restitution, not a handout, and it's neither of those. It is redistribution. You're taking money that was borrowed and wasted over here and sending it still borrowed and wasted over here. And yes, redistribution via these means is more wasteful spending, not less. And apparently, this idea found some reception with the president himself, according to Fox. In an interview that aired earlier this week with Fox's Sean Hannity, Trump and Musk said they expect to find $1 trillion in excess federal spending that could be slashed. Then ex-user James Fishback wrote a post that tagged Musk and outlined his plan to take 20% of the savings found by Doge to send it back to, quote, hardworking Americans as a tax refund check, which it is not. It was their money in the first place. Fishback noted that if Doge achieves its goal of cutting $2 trillion in federal spending, that would provide the 78 million tax-paying households in the U.S. with about a $5,000 refund or Doge dividend per household, with the remainder used to pay down the national debt. Because we're still borrowing the money. We'll check with the president, Musk replied on Tuesday in response to the post, and now Fox reports a day later, while attending the investment conference in Miami, Trump confirmed that the administration is considering a concept in which 20% of the savings produced by Doge's cost-cutting effort goes to U.S. citizens and another 20% goes to paying down the national debt, when 100% should be going to the national debt.
Under consideration, a new concept where we give 20% of the Doge savings to American citizens and 20% goes to paying down debt, because the numbers are incredible, Elon. So many billions of dollars, billions, hundreds of billions, and we're thinking about giving 20% back to the American citizens and 20% down to pay back debt.
They're talking about giving people their money back when this is not it. This is not that. This is something else entirely. It is more redistribution and central planning. No matter how much they might dress it up, this is a complete betrayal to cutting wasteful spending from the government and letting the economy go free finally at long last. This is actually another way to harm the economy, as much as it sounds good to the individual taxpayer that might get a $5,000 check, which is the entire friggin' point. As I said, this is another form of central planning. By the way, tariffs are too. Tariffs are a form of central planning, and not a very good one. Since George W. Bush and his damn failed helicopter payment in 2008, the one that nobody remembers because it failed so spectacularly, ever since then, we've started down this road, and it has only gotten worse and bigger, where the government hands out more and more and more and more. And obviously it started before Bush, but these direct payments from Bush unleashed the genie. And the real thing here, what we need to do is get that genie back in the bottle, not make it bigger and bigger and bigger, no matter how much it might be rationalized and characterized. Now we're welcome to the 2020s, where the checks to people are now so damn common, we might as well just adopt UBI and stop pretending there is any free market economy left. Sending people money for no reason is just more waste, and it will harm the economy. And there is no justification for it in economics either. The idea that we would have spent the money anyway is not a sound and legitimate reason to do this. There is no economic purpose here. And the people who are receiving that wasteful government spending to begin with, they're already spending it. So what's the difference if we take it from people over here who are spending that wasted money to give it to people over here who are going to spend the same wasted money? It's all still wasted money. It's still money that's being borrowed from the economy that it can't really afford it, raising the government's debt, crying more interest payments to do what? There's nothing of value that's created. So the people who get the wasted government funding now are already spending it, and so would the people who receive it. So there's nothing different about that. You're just changing who gets to receive money the government doesn't have. It's not as if we're redirecting funds that would be wasted overseas back to the US. In order to achieve these levels of government savings is going to require most of the cuts to happen domestically. So again, you're taking money from one government spending and giving it to another government spending for no value created in the process. This is why government always fails in stimulus. It redistributes money for non-economic reasons, for arbitrary purposes that often create no value for the economy or even the government that's spending it. Economic growth depends on value creation. That's how free market economies work. And when governments waste money in either spending or redistribution, it doesn't create value. It takes value out of the economy. An economy that is healthy enough can absorb that value destruction, but one like we have now simply can't afford it. It cannot afford more inefficient, wasteful redistribution any more than it can handle ongoing massive amounts of wasteful spending. You should only get paid by the government like a private service or private business when you provide a valuable service to it. Wasteful spending doesn't meet that threshold, and redistribution is the same damn thing. So the best and only economically sound thing to do here is simply to reduce the deficit, full stop. Again, like I said in the intro here, it would be a different story if we were talking about getting enough cuts out of government spending so that it runs a surplus. If the government takes in more than it actually spends and you have more money left over, giving that money back to taxpayers is something we definitely should discuss if we could ever possibly get there. But that is not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is the government still borrowing money from future generations, and instead of spending it on programs nobody likes and nobody uses, giving it to other people who spend it in a different fashion, giving it to 78 million households. Whether or not they were taxed to begin with, it doesn't seem to matter. As Ronald Reagan said, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And that's true no matter who is president. And this is the shit that needs to be stopped. Redistribution and government cutting checks for no value creation and no real legitimate reason. This is not giving people their money back. If you want to give people their money back, give it back to taxpayers after you run the surplus, those who were actually taxed, not everyone. When you give handouts to everyone, you create more dependency, and you are redistributing and reallocating resources in the most inefficient and distortive fashion possible. We just went through this in the supply shock period. And yes, it felt good in the beginning when everybody felt rich because they had government checks. And then what happened? The checks ran out, prices shifted, they went up, and they don't come back down, and everybody was left behind. While their incomes went away, prices didn't readjust. We all were made poor for something like this. Did everyone forget this? And we go to the CBO and just look at the numbers here. In 2024, the CBO says that revenues were about 17.1% of GDP, which is already way too high, even though that was a little bit less than the 17.3% average from 1974 to 2024. Outlays, however, were 23.7% of GDP in 2024, which is well above the historical average of 21.1%. So the deficit was 6.6% of GDP, well above the historical average of 3.8%. 3.8% is way too high to begin with. And the CBO projects that for 2025, the federal government's budget deficit this year will be 1.9 trillion. 1.9 trillion. So the idea here is, let's say the government can somehow save us $900 billion. They can cut that deficit down to 1 trillion. So if they're saving that money in terms of eliminating wasteful spending, they're going to borrow an extra $400 billion anyway just to fund this Doge dividend. There's no dividend here. All they're actually doing is borrowing money for spending or borrowing money to give people checks. They're not giving people their money back. They're paying people for no reason. So after cutting $900 billion in wasteful spending out, leaving the deficit at $1 trillion, and then adding another $400 billion in debt to pay the people the Doge dividend, we're still $1.4 trillion in deficit. $1.4 trillion in deficit. What sense does any of this actually make? You're not giving people their money back. You're just borrowing more for a different reason, and a reason that's just completely arbitrary. There's no economic reason behind it. The idea of a fiscal surplus is so far, it's a complete pipe dream. According to CBO's calculations, federal outlays in 2025 are going to total somewhere around $7 trillion, or another 23.3% of GDP. So let's cut, say, $1 trillion out and then add $500 billion back, or thereabouts $400 billion back to fund this Doge payment? No way. And there's no way you're going to be able to cut more than that. You're not going to be able to cut $2 trillion from the federal government deficit. Or federal government spending. I wish we could, but it's not going to happen. So as far as the economics go, I mean, as I just said, we went through this a couple years ago, and it led nowhere good. Forget about the government dependency and waste. The one-time payments led to price shocks, which is exactly what would happen again. Supply in the economy, whether it be goods or services, cannot respond to that level of demand all at once, especially that level of demand for non-economic reasons, non-organic reasons. It leads to distortion, imbalance, harmful distortion, harmful imbalances over the long run, because as prices adjust, as we've seen only too well, they adjust in one direction only and don't go back. So we're going to make everybody feel rich in the short run by redistributing government money. Once again, prices adjust, and then after then, what happens? Everyone is left off poorer for the adjustment. It's another phase shift. Again, we went through a phase shift a couple years ago, and we're paying the price for it. So there's no economic justification for doing this. In the same way, there's no fiscal justification for doing this either. This is all just simple economics, which seems to have eluded those who are simply, hopefully they're throwing together ideas and just saying, okay, this sounds good in my head. And then when they stop and think about it, they have second thoughts and realize there really is nothing good about this whatsoever. Now there's some other explanations for why this has come up, which might be the fact that maybe this is just a trial balloon in anticipation of some bad economic circumstances up ahead, getting the idea out there that government can fund a transfer to people based on savings from cutting government waste. Not because they're doing it as a Doge dividend, but because they know the economy might be in rough shape, especially when we get through both the trade war and tariff angle, as well as cutting the government. Whether we like it or not, government activity has been a huge part of maintaining even just a limited amount of economic growth that we've had. They have to know that eliminating all of these jobs is, while that's positive in the long run, in the short run, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pain from it. I don't think people realize how many government jobs have been created over the last couple of years and what that has done to support an overall labor market that has languished far behind recovery to begin with. So just cutting government jobs, again, that's good in the long run, especially if they don't provide any valuable service to the electorate, to the public, to the government itself. Fine, get rid of them, but there's going to be a short-run disruption. And we saw the market's response to the prospect for trade wars. In fact, it unleashed what was a pretty sharp and severe dollar shortage all around the world. We got currencies that were crashing. We saw a dollar squeeze indications in dealer activities and foreign reserve manager holdings. They were selling treasuries furiously. In fact, that's one of the reasons why treasury yields rose as much as they did during December into the middle of January. It corresponds exactly with this trade war fear that erupted throughout the marketplace. And the reason why there's trade war fear in the marketplace is because the marketplace understands that the economy globally and domestically is not in good shape. So you implement trade wars and tariffs, you cut a bunch of government jobs. While those may be good in the long run, that's debatable, but either way, while those might be good in the long run, in the short run, the economy is going to take a hit. So maybe this $5,000 trial balloon is simply a way to introduce the idea as the economy tails off of making people happy to suffer through the transition. And that's the best I can come up with this, because the bond market is not buying the economy lifting off from here. If anything, the bond market is saying we still see all the same risks. And then given the reaction in December and January, there's even greater risks on top. So like I said, I honestly hope this is just some short-run political misstep, just something that happened and came up, and everyone, when cooler heads prevail, they realize how much of a horrible idea this is. First of all, it is not giving people their money back, because most of the people don't even pay taxes to begin with. If you want to give people their money back, first of all, run a surplus so that you have more money coming in than goes out. And then second of all, talk about giving their money back, giving it back to people who actually paid the taxes, not to just blanket everyone. Giving money to just everyone is the form of redistribution that this whole thing is supposed to be rebelling against. It's supposed to be eliminating. This central planning bullshit. That needs to stop. And yes, this is exactly what it is. It's central planning redistribution bullshit. So like I said, I hope this is nothing more than someone floating a bad idea that sounds good on its face, and then once people start to think about it, they realize this really is an absurd idea that checks none of the boxes that we want to check, and instead would lead to even more of what we don't want and what we're trying to eliminate. Let's hope calmer heads prevail, because this is absolute bullshit. Where do we go from here? How about we talk about other central banks and what they're doing in response to a global economy even before we get to trade wars? Australia, New Zealand, they're in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.